Hello, everyone, and welcome to Quadrant 4 Politics. Today we are doing a comment episode responding to the comments from our last episode talking about transgenders in the military and just transgenders in general. But the main primary question of the day was, should the military allow transgenders, meaning should they allow transgender people in the military? And these are the comments we got on the episode. It's been a little while since we recorded last, so we don't quite remember everything that we said in the last episode, but we remember a significant majority of it.
We remember what we believe.
Yeah. And also, we got a ton of comments on this, which is awesome. Thank you guys so much for the responses. However, there's so many of them that we kind of had to just choose specific sections of ones we liked. Also, there were plenty of conversations going on in the comments, so we would just choose like the main points that were made in conversations. So we tried to edit the dialogue as much as possible to make it make sense to the listener
without changing
without the context.
Yeah, without changing what the person's saying, trying to just get the point out.
Yeah. So on the
also, this is episode 8.5.
Was it episode 8 that we did last?
Pretty sure.
Good deal. Hopefully, let's hope so. Oh yeah, it's written at the top of the page. I'm dumb.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyways, so on the libertarian subreddit that we posted this on, a lot of the libertarians just said they want less military and they want to focus on people who are able to fight. So there wasn't a whole lot of unique discussion that we really wanted to talk about. That was just one of the main points, right?
Yeah, one person made a joke that said, what if we only had transgender soldiers? That would cut the military spending and size down to where it should be. I am not quite as libertarian as you, and I know the person was joking, but I disagree with reducing our military to that size, but I will allow you to have that belief.
Maybe we can do a discussion about the military in the future as one of our main topic episodes. Anyways, let's get into the first comment that we have here. This one is Danimal4NU or Danimal4NU. He says, I oppose a hardline ban, but if you look at everything that will keep you out of the military, gender dysphoria is right in line with those other things, and that community isn't really being singled out. What do you think of that one?
I think that is kind of the conclusion I had at the end of at the end of the podcast for episode 8 was, no, we don't really need a transgender ban because they're already kind of banned by default. So there's such a long list of things you have to do to, be the perfect soldier or whatever, or to get included. And by any reasonable measure, and not saying this is what I think, but by any reasonable measure, transgenders aren't allowed in the military because of psychological issues they may have, depression, the therapy, the surgeries. So I think kind of what it's more about is, are we making an exception if we do allow them in, rather than following that hardline thing? But I mean, we're living in a different day and age, so that's kind of something thing we have to battle there.
Before we go any further, just to recap what we did in episode 8, if for some reason someone's listening to this instead of without listening to episode 8, but what was our conclusions at the end? I know my conclusion at the end was, I think transgenders should be allowed in the military, but that the military shouldn't cover anyone's medical expenses unless they're injuries that were sustained during the military. I think that the military should pay people more, and that should be their incentive to join the military. What was your conclusion?
Well, I think as far as benefits in the military, like any employer, you want to have benefits from them. You want to have insurance. You want to know that even if you get a cold outside of serving, that you're going to be able to be covered. That's what I believe as far as that. I don't believe, though, that, because our tax dollars are going to this, and, I completely support our soldiers, but I don't believe our tax dollars should be going to reconstructive surgery or hormone therapy or any non-essential. And I understand that some people say it's essential, but it is not something, Some people would say they need bigger breasts to feel better, or a vasectomy, but in reality, you don't have to have those things. You will live without them. So Yeah. But
Also, I'm going into these comments with an open mind of changing my opinion of things. If they bring up a reason that's good enough, I think it's always good to go into the conversation with an open mind.
that's kind of how I live. It's just knowing I'll change my mind.
This guy does bring up a good point, the D-Animal 4NU, just real quick. I think he's right that gender dysphoria is something that, are people with depression allowed in the military, or people who have other, like, physical illnesses like that, where it's kind of like a psychological thing?
For the most part, no. I mean, you can get waivers. I had a friend who was taking, like, Ritalin or something, and he went to the recruiter, and the recruiter's like, are you on any medications? And, he said, yeah, I'm on Ritalin. And the recruiter said, I'm going to ask you again, are you on any medications? Yeah. And my friend was like, oh, no, I'm not. He's like, all right, great, sign here. And so for the most part, no. There might be certain ones, I'm not sure, but a lot of the mental illnesses will keep you from being able to serve.
And that's not us saying that it necessarily is a mental illness. It's just something mentally that disagrees with your body. And there could be other versions of those that we're just ignorant to, that we don't know about, that the military does.
Well, and also, even if we say transgenderism isn't a mental illness, there's still, I think people on all sides of the issue would agree that the depression rate and the suicide rate, the anxiety rate is going to be higher among transgenders. But then again, there's a point of looking at people as a whole group and looking at individual by individual. So
yeah. All right. Let's see. Next comment here. All right. So this is a little bit of a discussion going on the next page here. AJ the trainer says, from my understanding, the trans ban isn't about gender identity, but more about hormones and transitioning. There are many medical conditions that preclude you from joining the military. Having to take hormones to express your preferred gender is a medical issue. Personally, I have no issue with any able-bodied individual who wants to serve our country. Bacon and sausage, bacon_and_sausage, said, no, its purpose is to execute the will of the government, not play gender politics. Hyatt Man replied, it clearly takes a stance on gender politics if it bans trans people. Bacon and Sausage replied, the mission of the military is to be at a constant state of readiness at its peak lethality. How does adding trans people to that increase lethality and readiness? Have you ever been in the military? All it will do is create problems. So, what do you think about those?
I think each person is making a good point, and they're all coming from it from a logical perspective. I don't think that it necessarily has to be playing gender politics. Now, whether or not that was Trump's decision or something I recently learned was that it was only 9 months before Trump announced this on Twitter that he was going to do this, is that the same time Obama said we're going to open the military to transgenders and allow them to have the medical benefits for their needs. So
9 months before Trump said the transgender military ban, Obama said we're open to transgenders.
Yes, how it was before. During Obama's tenure as president, they repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So obviously, openly gay people were able to serve. I don't know exactly how that affected transgenders. Transgendered. But I don't. Regardless of what Trump's reasoning is, I would say you can create a reason without it being gender politics, and whether that reason is the costs involved and the taxpayers paying it, or whether it's a mental illness, doesn't necessarily have to be gender politics, but at the same time, it could be used that way. I think Bacon and Sausage makes, the strongest point when he says the mission of the military is to be at a constant state of readiness and at its peak lethality. How does adding trans people to that increased lethality and readiness? I put a little note here. I said adding or subtracting, because there's probably already transgender people in the military even before Obama said it was fine.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're necessarily talking about adding it. Just, but I don't know, his idea on military readiness. I think what it comes down to is, I mean, we do need a military that's ready to be the best military in the world, if and when shit hits the fan. So
yeah. He says, how does adding trans people to the military increase lethality and readiness? There's the theory that like a fence is only as strong as its weakest link, but I disagree with that in the sense of the military. I think adding trans people to the military doesn't decrease the lethality or readiness of the military, because the rest of the military can still be very strong. And that's not to say that trans people are weaker than most people. It's just saying that if that's your assumption that trans people are weaker than normal people, then I know using normal is such a terrible term, but and it's hard to talk about this stuff without being offensive. But it's I just, if you assume that trans people are weaker than normal people, which I don't think is the case, but if you think that's the case, I don't think that adding trans people weakens the military. If anything, I think it strengthens the military, as in like strength in numbers kind of thing. Also, if the theory is that the military is all about lethality and readiness, then the draft doesn't make sense, because if they enact the draft, you and I are going to the military, and you and I are both chubby dudes who don't exercise at all. We would not strengthen the military.
And I take too many medicines. You can go to the draft on your own.
Well, I'm chubby and I have fucking IBS, so I have to take a shit on the battlefield.
I didn't even know that about you. But
also, if that's really your concern, then they can join the military, but maybe like the special forces don't need transgender people. Because the special forces go in without any backup, and the transgender people might not be able to handle that because of, medical purposes.
Well, both the draft and something else you said are both things that we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Coming up for sure. Moving on?
Yeah, moving on.
Cool. Next comment is from, oh my goodness, this person's name.
Yeah, I don't.
Mes Zek Lazdezer. Awesome name, bro.
MESZEKLOZDZER.
It's Russian. He's a Russian spy.
Probably.
Anyways, he says, if I was mentally ill, it does not impair one's cognitive abilities, so there's no reason to discriminate them in terms of work they can perform.
No, he was saying, he said, even if it is mental illness, it does not impair one's cognitive abilities.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
So there's no reason to discriminate them in terms of work they can perform. And with respect to Mr. Mezek, you can't say if it's mental illness, it doesn't impair cognitive abilities, because those are kind of two in one.
Yeah. And,
so that's...
Dragon-Captain replied, I don't see why people shouldn't be allowed to serve if they're transgender. It's not something that really affects how one would perform in combat. Any response to that?
No, I don't know why I highlighted that. Okay.
Well, we're talking about, like, does mental illness affect your cognitive abilities? Like, can mentally ill people serve in the military, is what they're saying.
I don't know. At the end of the day, aren't we all mentally ill?
Yeah, I mean, everyone has, especially in this day and age where depression is on the rise, everyone is technically mentally ill almost.
I think like 75% of people
broad
take
overstatement, but yeah,
medications.
Whether it's ADHD, autism, depression, shit like that, it's like, it seems like a lot of people have issues, and I still feel like we can all, run a mile, for the most part, unless you have like cerebral palsy or something like that, like a physical issue.
What about shin splints?
Hey, isn't that what Trump had?
Yeah,
no, he had bone spurs.
Whatever. I was just making a joke.
Well, those are
really
physical
care.
things. It's, can a mentally ill person, perform functions in the military? Which is a good question, because it's like, should you be giving a mentally ill person a gun? Which
is discussed later on.
Yeah, that's discussed later on as well. Anything else to reply to these?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Let me see. So this next one is a really good one. This is from a transgender woman, and unfortunately, I don't have her name. If it might have been anonymous. I'm not sure if that's possible on Reddit, but either way, she makes a really good comment here. So we're just going to go read through, take turns reading.
Sure.
This.
Can I make something real clear first?
Yeah.
I am really bad. I do not misgender people, but not on purpose at least, but I'm really bad about when somebody says trans woman, I think of man, and when somebody says trans man, I think woman. I don't know, maybe I think the trans cancels it out, or I don't know, because you're saying something
A
in front
transgender
of...
woman is a man who converted into a woman.
I know, but then it's like, why are you putting the trans in front? I don't know. So if I mix it up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I understood. And if you let me have a sidebar real quick, that's one of the things I really don't like about Ben Shapiro is he refuses to call people by their preferred pronouns. And I don't think it should be a law by any means. Like in Canada, they tried to make it a law, and I know in the United States, some states are trying to make it a law. But I still think, out of respect, if someone says politely, if they're an angry SJW about it, then maybe you can fuck with them, But if they ask politely, like, hey, I go by she, absolutely, I am totally okay with that, just out of respect, just being a basic nice guy. Like, I think that's the right way to be. And it angers me about Ben Shapiro is that if someone looks like a woman and then he finds out that they're a transgender woman, then he'll start referring to them as a man.
So yeah, my two responses to that are, one, that's kind of my only problem with Ben Shapiro, besides that I love him. Oh, also that he needs Jesus, but
because he's a Jew.
Not, you can be a Jew for Jesus. But anyway, my second point would be that yeah, if I misgender you because you have a full beard and you come in with your big ass wide shoulders and a little pink purse and your, I don't know, Seahawks jersey, like, sorry I misgendered you, but you didn't try hard enough.
Yeah.
Like,
but if that person comes in and says, hey, I go by ma'am, absolutely.
If I get to regularly know them, it'll become second nature. And I discussed that during the last one where I started work with somebody who looked very much like a male but was a female. For the first while, everybody called her him.
Yeah.
But eventually we all knew her, so that's how it was. So, but besides that, yeah, if somebody's very passable, I don't believe in just, you just call them by their name. In fact, there was a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court actually ended up ruling against the transgender student, but some far-right group like rewrote it and changed like the pronouns in the court's decision, because the court used the preferred pronoun.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court just like flipped out and was like, do not ever change our wording again.
That's pretty funny. All right, so anyways, without further ado, let's get into this excellent comment here.
From a trans woman.
From a trans woman,
who we don't know, but all right.
So let's see. She begins with, just a warning, this is a left-leaning sub that makes fun of centrist talking points, so it's probably not what you want. We posted this in Enlightened Centrism. And she says, I have a few points in response to your video, however. The first point is, in 2014, the Department of Defense spent an estimated $2.4 to $8.4 million on transgender-related care, which is about 0.017% of its total budget, compared to $41.6 million on Viagra and $84.24 million on erectile dysfunction prescriptions in general, which seems to me far less important. Money isn't the real issue here. And then she cites her source.
Okay.
Matt's going to read the second one.
Number 2, she says, one of you depicted transgender people as delusional. I'm a trans woman. I know I have XY chromosomes. I know I have male genitalia for now. I am not deluded as to either of those facts. I still identify as a woman. The only difference here is that my definition of a woman is less antiquated and more useful in modern society. It has been proved through many large control studies that transitioning decreases rates of depression among transgender people. So there's really no logical reason to misgender them.
Her third point is, as for neurological studies comparing trans and cis people of the same gender's brains, you're correct that there haven't been any sufficiently large-scale studies that confirm anything, but preliminary studies indicate that trans women's brains are closer to cis women's than men's, etc. So really, all we have from this so far is that sticking to traditional gender roles seems fairly irrational.
And then number 4, last point. From my first point, it's clear that banning trans people from the military could only have been a power play. It helps remove trans people from public image and can be used to paint trans people as anti-patriotic over time to a conservative demographic. Very similar methods have been used in the past to silence and provoke violence against homosexual people.
All right, so first thing I want to say about this is she says in her second point she opens up with, one of you depicted transgender people as delusional. Do either of us think that?
I might have said I might have said it like in passing, like, well, if you're just a delusional person who doesn't realize that X and Y runs through your body. If I did say it, I did not mean to say the entire group. I definitely did say there's gender dysphoria there, which we can all agree to. There's a mismatch, and I would say I fall on the side of, yes, I do consider it a mental illness, but like I said in the last one, that doesn't mean it takes away from your humanity. You're not less of a person because you have a mental illness. I have mental illnesses. Everybody's got fucking mental illnesses. So if I said it and I was offensive, that was not my intent. I don't remember saying it, so...
Yeah, I don't remember saying it either, but there could have just been a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. I don't think either of us think of transgender people as delusional, and I apologize if we came across that way. I think that Matt and I are both open and welcoming to transgender people, and if we were able to find one, I'm sure we would have been happy to have them on the podcast.
Yeah, they say, like, I think like they say, I don't know, there's some statistic, like most people now know a transgender person, and I don't, and it's not for,
personally.
It's not for lack of, like,
I see
trying.
them in public. When you go to Seattle, you see a lot of them, but like in the suburbs where we live, not so much.
Yeah, I guess, but yeah, I mean, as conservative or libertarian or whatever as we are, we're not out to hate anybody. We're going to give you our honest opinion, but that's what you're going to get. So we're not trying to bash on anyone.
So on her first point, she talks about the money spent, and it's some really interesting statistics that she has here, and I'm glad she cites their source so that we know that they're true. But it looks like it tops $8.4 million spent on transgender-related care, whereas tops $84.24 million on erectile dysfunction prescriptions, which is really interesting, and it just...
it's about 10 to times 20.
It's
10 to 20 times the amount.
Yeah, and it's good argument for people who say transgender should be in the military, because the military isn't, like, for the people who saying it's costing the military too much, they don't have a whole lot of ground to stand on because they're spending this much money on Viagra, which is something that's not necessary. I mean,
yeah, and you're
maybe
right,
for the happiness of the soldiers, but it's optional.
Yeah, and it does fall into that category I was saying of, it's not something you have to take or you'll die. Now obviously there's a lot of things like that most insurance companies cover, and most insurance companies are going to cover Viagra like they would any other medication that kind of falls into that category.
Yeah,
it's not the same with being transgendered, though. There's going to be less companies that cover those type of procedures, and they probably do to a lesser percent than they cover the Viagra. So I think it's a good argument, but one thing she says is, which seems to me far less important. From her standpoint, maybe it is, but from the millions of guys who can't get it up after having PTSD or whatever, to them that might
and
be more
there
important.
could also be the argument that the conservatives think that your transgender issues aren't that important.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's just an argument in general.
But
as far as the 2.4 to 8.4 million on transgender related care, some people, I mean, yeah, I've seen the pie graph, and it is a very small slice, but some people are going to make the argument that any amount is, you spend $1 on it and it's too much, and especially from, a lot of libertarians don't want their money, going to things that aren't necessary, including, hardcore ones would say, I don't want my taxes paying for insurance for the military at all.
Yeah.
They can get their own insurance or their own insurance outside the military. So,
Well, let me get into my libertarian stances here. So give me a minute to
Yeah,
get my
Lord.
psycho babble. But I think my opinion on the military is that the military shouldn't offer any benefits at all. The benefit of the military is that you get paid a very high wage, and the military should be smaller than it is. I don't think the military should be in other countries. I don't think that we constantly have an offensive military force. I think our military force needs to be primarily defensive. But the thing that I think would make sense is take the 8.4 million spent on transgender related care and take the 84.24 million spent on erectile dysfunction prescriptions, mix those together, and then spread them between all the soldiers evenly so that all the soldiers get, what is that, about 92 million, 93 million total. Split that between all the soldiers and just give them a pay bump, like what. That seems like a better option to me, because then people get more money and then they can spend it how they choose.
Okay, but as for me, somebody who uses their insurance, each month I have $200 in doctor bills, and then like probably $1,500 to $1,700 medication, and I pay zero for the medication, and I pay 20% of the doctors. If I didn't have that insurance, the pay bump wouldn't mean crap, because it would all be going to that $1,700.
Well,
so
in a free market, prices come down, but the fact of the matter, and unfortunately, it's not a realistic solution to just pay the soldiers more and have them pay for their own health insurance, because the healthcare system in the country is so fucked up. But if you want a real libertarian solution, a free market capitalist solution, is we need to make healthcare less regulated and have less restrictions on it by the government, because that's part of the reason why everything costs so much. Is the government is so anal about everything that has to do with healthcare. And in the past it was rightfully so, because healthcare is an important thing to everyone and it needs to be done right and taken care of properly. But nowadays, in the modern age where communication is so easy because of the internet and research is way easier to be done, we don't need all those regulations and restrictions that are on the healthcare system. And it's the legalese of everything is all just a lobbying by groups that make it complicated so that they can come out on top, which is part of crony capitalism. Capitalism. So what needs to be done is we need a true fair market in the healthcare insurance industry. We need to make it easier to become a doctor. We need to make healthcare less complicated. And every month I get a fucking book in the mail from my healthcare telling me about how it changed. No one reads those things. No one's going to read through the legalese, because it doesn't make sense to us, because we're not educated
every
on
month.
that crap. Pretty much every month, I feel like, or every other month. Like, I get them in the mail fucking all the time, and it's all just the government telling them that they need to regulate this shit and make it so restrictive. And that's why it's so expensive, is because they have to pay people to figure this shit out, but they're also paying lobbyists because they're trying to trick the system so that they can get more money. In the end, it all ends up on the consumer, who gets screwed over by it. So it's not the free market can fix everything if we just let it, but capitalism, crony capitalism, and regulation and restriction by the government is fucking everything up.
Okay.
But that was my spiel.
That is your spiel. Now let's talk about this nice young woman in the military.
Thank you for letting me rant. Any points? Anything to talk about on the second point?
The second point.
I really like that she's self-aware that she knows she has XY chromosomes, and she knows she has male genitalia. That's something I've always wondered about trans people is, do they just deny those things outright, or are they aware of them? Are they self-aware?
Okay, and I guess if that's the case, then they are delusional. Like, if they're saying, no, my chromosomes, if she was to say, no, my chromosomes are XX, I swear, I promise, like, that is delusional. And I guess, you can be delusional to different levels, where you can actually believe your lies, or...
Yeah, I mean, if she actually believed that she had XX chromosomes and didn't, that's delusional. But if that's just what she says to make herself feel better, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, different, levels. What I don't agree with here is, I guess something I have an issue with, the only difference here is that my definition of a woman is less antiquated and more useful in modern society.
So she's saying that
maybe for the
women are more... like ambidextrous, Like they can be a little bit more male showing, male presenting.
Well, she does go on to argue about gender roles, but she's saying less antiquated, so less old, more useful, more modern.
Yeah.
But that is, I for one think gender roles exist and are real and they're important. They're a part of science. Do I think they have to be super old school? No. But changing the definition of a woman to be more modern doesn't really change anything about what a person is. And I think the statement's very just specific to the transgender community, which is a fraction of a percent, you know. So I don't, I guess if she has her own definition of a woman, that's fine, and I'm not going to say she's delusional for that, but
this whole point is a little bit irrelevant because she starts off with assuming that one of us thinks transgender people are delusional.
Well,
which,
if one of us said
like I
it,
said, it may have been a miscommunication, misunderstanding. So the rest of it doesn't fully. It's a little bit irrelevant because obviously I think there was a misunderstanding there. But the last thing she says. It has been proved through many large control studies that transitioning decreases rates of depression among transgender people. And I don't know that to be true. And honestly, as we discussed in the main episode, there just isn't enough research out there to decide one way or another if transgender people are happier or not after transitioning. So it's unfortunate, and it's just like vaping. Vaping is so new, we have no clue what the long-term effects are. And so transgender people is such a, people have been transgender all throughout history. There's paintings and studies showing that men would like to dress up as women and women would like to dress up as men, but it's only been in modern society that we've really done research into and thought of it in a political sense and actually looked into doing controlled studies and stuff like that. So the information is so new and there's not a whole lot of it, and the amount of transgender people that are there in the world, and the people who are actually transgender, just not gender curious, I guess. There's not. It's so hard to research the topic because there's so few people. It's hard to get a bunch of them in a room together and research all of them.
Yeah, I was reading some study the other day that said something like, here's what we found of MTFs and then FTMs, and it said, please take into account, though, that the female to male, our group was only 43 people.
Yeah.
And for the male to females, it was like, I don't know, a couple thousand or something. So.
And that's unfortunate. So it's just something that we're going to have to see with time. More research will come out, and eventually we'll get a definitive answer on what this is, or at least definitive as we can get. Nothing in science is ever definitive. Number 3 is an interesting one. It also relates to studies saying that trans women's brains are closer to cis women than men's. And that's, in my research before recording the main episode 8, I found the same studies, is that which surprised me because I didn't think it was true, but when I found out that research, it really changed my mind on some things, is that transgender people's brains actually do look different in the brain scans. And that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I found that out doing, research on my own, I think, a year or two back. And then what a couple people brought up to me without me saying anything about it, they just kind of brought it up as a defense, because I was starting to make the argument of, well, actually, if it is the wrong brain and the wrong body, there's a little more merit to it,
Yeah.
And they said, well, if you're doing these on newborns, that's one thing, but if you're doing it on people who are conditioned, who are being told they're the opposite gender, who are being diagnosed as that, who grow up feeling that way, then, are you training your brain that way, or it's the whole nature versus nurture thing. She admits, which I'm, glad for her, that's a big thing to do. She admits there's not a lot of study on it, and it says that a transgender female is closer to a cis woman than a man. It's closer to. So I don't know. There's still a lot of gray area there. I don't think anything in this point.
I wonder if there's a way to scan a baby's brain and see if it's transgender. But that also might not be a thing that hits until puberty. Like, deciding your gender could also be something that hits at the same time you're deciding your sexuality. Not deciding as in it's a choice, deciding as like your biology deciding.
Yeah, like something clicks or whatnot.
Yeah.
Like some people say that being gay. It's like some people have a predisposition. So some people are in a group where they may or they may not become gay, and then other people, no matter what happens, they're just going to be straight because they don't have that predisposition.
Yeah.
Just a theory I've heard, So it could be, you're right, it could be similar. Or I guess they could scan a bunch of babies' brains and then, check the transgendered ones later on. But again, it's such a small population, and doing a bunch of MRIs on little babies, I don't know
What's
about that.
funny is that's something you'd think that Republicans would be so violently against, but man, there's already states that let an X option be on there on the birth certificate. I think California and New York, maybe even Washington too.
Well, those are all very liberal states.
Yeah, but I'm surprised that they even let that happen,
Well, I mean, states...
What if you go into Alabama with an X birth certificate, They're going to laugh
Oh,
you
are
out
you
of the
saying
state.
on birth certificates?
On the birth certificate, yeah.
Oh,
Instead
that's
of male, female, you
bull
can put
crap.
X. So,
Because that's your gender, or your... I consider gender and sex the same thing. I'm sorry.
I might have to take that back. I know you can change your gender to X.
Change it.
And I
one
think
thing.
there's a state or two where you can put it on the birth certificate. But I'm not 100% sure about the birth certificate.
We can't just say
but
this baby was born with a penis, like...
yeah, that would be good.
That's going too far.
Instead of putting male, female, put penis or vagina.
Yeah,
I love it.
Jiminy Christmas. And that's just where it gets kind of, out of control. Is like we can't just call things as they are, especially when they are,
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to label my kid he or she. I'm going to avoid those terms until they get older, which I don't think a big group of people are doing, but, I've at least heard the jokes. I got to imagine there's a couple people out there who are doing that.
So her last point is she says that banning people from the military...
Wait. So the third, she says, so really all we have from this so far is that sticking to traditional gender roles seems fairly irrational. Again, I just want to say that I disagree with that.
You believe in gender roles?
I believe in what I see and what's scientifically proven, and that is that men and women are not the same. There are very big differences to men and women. I remember when I was little, like 5 years old, and I had a brand new baby born sister. I said, Dad, how do we know, my sister is actually a girl? Like, what if she's a boy? And he said, we can take her to the doctor and check. And then the bulb clicked in my mind, like, oh yeah, we know because their genitalia,
Yeah.
So and then men and women have become more equal, and that's fine, but men still are biologically bigger, physically bigger. Women still live longer lives. That hasn't changed. Women still go through the change towards the end of their life, or later in their life. Yeah, I'm trying to, not be gross, but
menopause is a gross word.
There's...
That is the most Christian Republican thing you've ever said. That is Mike Pence coming out of you.
What did I say?
I don't want to say menopause because it's gross.
Anyway, so...
Well, I don't think anyone who's worth speaking to denies that there's difference between the sexes. I think a big reason why gender roles are such a hot topic issue for liberals is because we can admit that men and women are different and that it can lead them to different careers, and maybe women tend to be the person who tends to the house and children, but they don't want that to be what's expected of them. Like, women don't want to go into the world being expected to bear children, to be expected to be a housewife, to be expected to go into child care education instead of going into a STEM research college career, So gender roles are, they come out naturally, but I think the liberals just don't want them to be unforced on either of us. We want men who can be stay-at-home dads, too.
Let's go back to the STEM thing, because I got this little thing on, my login on my laptop from Microsoft that said, oh no, only 8% of women are joining STEM, and I saw somebody's post online, and it's, somebody else had made the same concern, maybe not Microsoft, but it said there's a reason for that, and it's because women and men choose different career paths, and that shows that there are still differences. And of the top five highest paying, men have 4 out of the 5. Of the lowest 5 paying that you can get with a degree, women have 4 out of the 5.
Well, yes,
people are
that
still
comes
choosing
out,
different.
That comes out naturally, but that doesn't. What the liberals are trying to say is they don't want to be discouraged or prevented by systemic or official rules that says women can't be in the tech industry.
Yeah,
you know?
and
that, I can understand that. I understand where they're coming from with that.
I agree, but it's also become
like if you're looking at several different candidates to hire to your tech company, you shouldn't disclude the woman because men tend to be better. But if you only hire men, or if men are the only ones who end up being hired at your company because you just went by choosing the best, not for sexist reasons, just because if that was what was on their resume, they had more impressive resumes than the woman at every level, that shouldn't be a problem. You don't want to force diversity by saying we have to have a woman, but there's no reason why the women should be discouraged from joining the company or anything that should prevent them.
Absolutely agree with that, but women by the left, and I'll take crap for this one, are being discouraged from being stay-at-home moms. They're being told that if you want to devote yourself to be a stay-at-home mom, to be a homekeeper, you're not living your full potential. You go put your children in daycare and let your maid come over and take care of the house twice a week or whatever. You go out there and you become a CEO.
See, I disagree. I would disagree that women are being told by the left.
They're not being directly told.
Maybe the far left is saying, women should be working, but I think I choose not to dwell on what the far left is saying because the far left is really loud, but it's really a minority. The majority of people on the left who consider themselves Democrats would say women are welcome to stay at home and they can be proud to be stay-at-home moms, and there's a lot of women who are proud to either be mothers or to be make the decision not to have children. I think a big part of the left and the good part of feminism encourages women to choose any path they want,
and that's exactly the point.
But
is that if
the
you
far
want
left
to
is
choose
ridiculous.
to be if you want to choose to be a mother, like
And
I would
like
say that's
far
probably
right,
the hardest job there is to choose. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I wouldn't want to.
I hate children.
Well, of course you do, but
the far right is the same thing. Instead of telling women that they can't be housewives, the far right tells them that they have to be housewives. That you're a woman, your job is to stay.
That's like
home.
super far right.
Yeah, but the same thing is super far left.
But the message that's coming from even just maybe not as far left is that
that's because
get the women into the workforce as to where it's like they're getting the feeling, without it being said, they're getting the feeling that I have to be part of the workforce, and if I want to be a stay-at-home mom, I am not good enough. I'm not living up to my potential. Even if that's not what's coming out of the left's mouth, that's kind of the message some of them are receiving. So anyway.
We're not really talking about transgenders anymore. We need to get back to this. Let me see.
Number 4.
Number 4 is, she says, banning trans people from the military could only have been a power play. Helps remove trans people from the public image, which is something I completely agree with. This is something that Republicans need to let go of, this whole transgender in the military thing. Because first of all, it's not that big of an issue, and bringing it up is a huge issue with the left, and it's going to lose you voters. Like, you're just creating drama by bringing up this transgender.
Which is why
it's easier to just let them be there and, say, hey, we'll pay for your hormones, but we're not going to pay for your surgery. I don't see why they don't do that.
I don't mind compromise or any of that, but when she says, from my first point, it's clear that banning trans people from the military could only have been a power play. The first thing I thought as soon as Trump did that was like, goodbye second term, like more than the kids in the cages, I thought like, at least with that, he could be like, well, they're not here legally, we can't find their parents, whatever,
Yeah.
But to just come out and tweet and say, going forward, there won't be any transgenders in the military, and then he left it for so long without an explanation,
Yeah.
I thought, like, I guess it can still be a power play, but it thought at the time it's political suicide. We'll see how it plays out. But
this is just one of those issues that is the left and the right both have several issues that they continually push that just loses them voters on both sides, and it's like. This is one of those topics that the transgenders are fine in the military. Just let them be there. It's not costing us that much money. It's a lot better for your party to just let it happen than to fight against it. Yeah. If anything, I think
I would say that's probably true. And I guess more.
Would you rather pay the $8.4 million for transgenders to be in the military, or would you rather lose the White House?
I'd probably rather pay the $8.4 million.
There you go, bam. Problem solved.
That's a good point, but it's a complicated issue. In any case, I think for this trans woman to reply to us, especially knowing that we're a more right-leaning, for the most part, podcast. Really appreciate it, and she said, so it's probably not what you want, but it is what we want, because we do want to hear from different points. So I wish we could respond to her and tell her that we included her.
We love you.
We don't know who you are, but anyway.
I'll reply to her and make sure that she can see the podcast.
I thought you don't know who she is, though.
Well, I know where her comment is. I can reply to it.
Oh, okay, I see.
I just don't have her name. It might have been blurred on Reddit or something. Either way,
gotcha.
I'll make sure she gets the message.
Yeah, but I think we definitely want to throw that out, that we appreciate. That's the only trans person we had
that we're aware of, unless other people.
Yeah, unless somebody. Yeah, nobody says it though.
All right, next comment comes from. By the way, we should probably speed through some of these a little bit. So quick comments. We're at 46.
Sure.
Say
that. Sorry.
Our goal was 45 minutes. That's okay. Chairman Maurer said, if military leaders say it's a complication that limits or jeopardizes their abilities, then no, trans people should not be allowed. I don't believe this is a decision that should be legislated. I think we should just leave it to the branches of military to police themselves on this. Nobody has a right to serve in the military. It's not an inclusivity program, first and foremost. If you are deemed unfit for any reason at all, you shouldn't be there, and that's all there is to it.
Okay, let me tell you something, Riley. Let me tell you something.
My quick response
Let me tell you something. Okay, no, you go ahead.
Okay. Thank you kindly, Matt. My quick response to this is that it's a really interesting idea that the people who are the leaders of the military should be the ones who decide who gets in, who gets out. And honestly, I think that that's kind of a good idea.
Okay, so who's the leader of the military?
Fuck the president. He sits in his White House. He literally sits in his White House.
He is the commander-in-chief.
He eats Big Macs all day. I prefer...
He eats well-done steak with ketchup and Diet Coke.
I prefer the people who are actually training the soldiers, the ones who are the generals and stuff like that, the ones whose opinion we actually value. Those are the ones who... If they say, hey, we don't want transgenders in the military because it's proven that their hormones are making them weaker for whatever reason, then I'd be okay with that. But as far as I'm aware, I don't know of any generals who are pro-transgender ban, so I really don't know. Go ahead with your point.
I think the person it's not an inclusivity program. Nobody has a right to serve in the military.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
That is great, except I want you to tell me that when there's a draft. Yeah. When a draft comes along, don't tell me that, oh, you didn't have the right before, but now we want you. Mm-hmm. So, because I think it's a really good point, but then at other times in history, we've drafted people, so we can't just say, it's kind of a beggars can't be choosers type deal, So if we go into a war and there's not enough soldiers... we're doing a lottery to decide who goes to die, Yeah. That's I think that's bullcrap. But
next one is from Coffee is a lot of fun. Great name. He says pre-op trans should be banned until they have their surgery and post-op treatment. Post-op trans who have been provided all treatment should be welcome. What is your response to that one?
That is what I was going to say to that one is that's kind of already the situation. I read a little bit into how
with the trans ban,
how it works, and there are actually a lot more exclusions than the media is letting people know, because the media is run by the left. I'm going to say it, and they want to make everything look as bad as they can. But there are certain
Yeah, it's true that the trans ban didn't change a whole lot because previously, if you had gender dysphoria, I believe that was considered something that could prevent you from being in the military.
Yeah, and so it got blown up way bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is Trump did it to himself, by
Absolutely.
sending out the tweets.
Yeah.
But also, from what I heard, and I don't have a source to verify this, I just heard it on the news, is that one of the conditions was that once you've transitioned fully to your new gender and have been in that gender for 3 years, then you're applicable for the, not applicable, you're eligible, sorry. You're eligible for the military. So that's kind of what the situation is and has become. Now, I don't know all the rules, but I just wanted to make that point, is that's kind of my understanding of how it is now.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to do it. I just, man, I don't know. This is such a hard topic to talk about because my opinion keeps changing.
Well, here, let's talk about this. I wanted to mention that pretty much consistently what we've come across is three main ideas. Is that transgender, there's a mental illness aspect of it, and then there's a battle readiness, right? Wasn't that the other one? And then there's a
battle ready's coming up.
And then there's a who pays for it,
Yeah.
So there's those three different things. I mean, the first two kind of go together. If you have a mental illness, how do you perform? But that everybody kind of is seeming to agree, for the most part, from the comments we got, that do whatever as long as you're mentally fit and we don't have to pay for your surgery. Kind of seems like the general theme of what I'm seeing here. Now, of course, a lot of it depends on what subreddits were posted to. Not everybody's going to agree with that, but it's kind of what I'm getting from some of the reasonable responses. So
yeah. My thing about the transgenders is that studies show that the hormone therapy is safe as long as you're being watched by a doctor, and that doctor situation makes it a little bit rough because you can't deploy someone to Afghanistan when they need to rely on meeting with a doctor twice a month.
A specialty doctor.
Yeah, so that's what concerns me. I absolutely support transgender people being in the military. I don't want the military to really pay for their medical things that aren't earned. I don't think that transitioning is something... you can identify as transgender, just go into the military naturally, not taking any hormones, and then once you get out of the military, start taking hormones,
Well, some people want to make it a career, though.
The military career? Yeah. I mean, I guess I understand that. It's really hard to deploy someone and have them depend on a doctor, They could be National Guards, they're on American soil and stuff like that. Or they can be deployed to a base where there are doctors who are specialized like that. Anyways, let's move on to the next comment. This one's Go for the KO. He says, I don't give a shit as long as they don't get their surgeries or anything associated with their transition paid by the military. I think we both agree with that, right?
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Let's see. Next one here is from Go for the KO again, later in the conversation. He says, not guessing with bias, there have been enough people who said they regret gender reassignment surgery, coupled with the abnormally high suicide rates after transition, to give pause to giving out free gender reassignment surgeries. Decades of studies need to be done with many different markers to decide if this is the right route. It's still far too early to decide on the subject. I couldn't even get braces when I was in the United States Marine Corps, even though my jacked up grill was cause for considerable mental duress.
And somebody goes on to say, how does that cause you mental duress? And it's like, well, if you have messed up teeth and you don't feel good about that image, that's the same as saying...
It can also hurt. Pain
yeah.
can cause,
Well, but he's talking
stress.
Mental illness, so...
Well, mental duress can be stress on the brain.
I reckon.
He says it's still far too early to decide on the topic, discussing studies, and that's something we've talked about. It's just a lot of the research that needs to be done on transgenders just isn't there yet from our research
and
studies.
So because of that, there's kind of the two groups. One is let's wait for the transgenders until these studies are completed, and then the other groups, you're depriving people of their rights until these studies are completed, which it's not just studies; it's what history will tell us and show
Yeah.
us. So,
I Eat Time 20, he says the suicide rate has much more to do with general societal discontent against trans people than the surgery itself. And that's an interesting thought, is that trans people are, the reason why transgender people commit suicide after transitioning is not because they're depressed because of their transition. They're depressed because society won't accept them. What do you think of that idea?
I would say that's a big generalization. I would say that's sometimes the case, but not always. Because there have been people who've transitioned back, and it wasn't because people were mean to me. It was because the answer to transgendered people or people with gender dysphoria is not always sex reassignment surgery. And I think somebody else here goes on to say, that should be a last resort. So I don't agree with the fact that it's just society. I think it's also because it's a hard thing to live with. I can't imagine for the people who actually have to live in that hell.
Not only do you have to be uncomfortable in your own body, but you have to... There's no denying it. If you're transgender and you're not 100% passable, people are going to be looking at you as you walk down the
But you
street.
could also live in a really inclusive area, like if you
Yeah,
want to live
but you still go to Seattle and people still look at them. It's like they're not I don't know. They still stand out in a crowd.
Yeah. Okay.
And I also, something I wanted to add up here is that suicide numbers are up among transgender people, but the fact is that suicide numbers are up all over. Everyone's killing themselves these days for a variety of reasons.
Well, but the percentage is pretty big in the transgender community.
You think it's affecting them more?
Absolutely.
Well, I wonder if the suicide rate went down among everyone. By the way, suicide affects straight white men the most.
That is true.
The number one killer of us.
And it's the number 10 killer of just people in the USA. Number 10 of all the things you can die of. Number 10, suicide.
So, if anything, what I'm saying here is that you and I are transgender because we're straight white men who have the possibility of committing suicide, just like transgender people. So that's how we're the same.
So we're not privileged that way. Okay.
But yeah, suicide's up all over. If suicide went down, maybe it would be better for the transgender people too. Maybe if straight white men were happy, then transgender people would be happy too. I Eat Time 20 again says, if you feel that your nose is wrong on your face and want to have it cut off, or your arm amputated, doctors do not support your delusion. By the way, there are fetishes of people who like getting amputated or
that is true.
Have sexual fantasies about that.
That's weird, but it's true.
He says, because that's not the same thing as gender dysmorphia. I think he meant dysphoria. So why are they... ... Let me turn the page. Why are they indulging one delusion and not the other if everyone should have their delusions fed, quote unquote? Perhaps it's because they're doctors and we're not, and they've done research while you and I have read blogs. Do you see why I trust doctors more than I trust you on this matter? This person was replying to someone else. So the point that he's making here is, should we trust doctors on this matter?
Doctors have decided that removing of your genitals or your breasts is okay.
Not a delusion.
Is not a delusion because it goes along with your gender dysphoria. However, if you want to remove your arm for the sexual pleasure or because you believe an alien lives inside your arm, then they're not going to support that.
But what do you think about that?
I disagree.
And why do you disagree?
Well, I disagree because in both cases you want to remove part of your body that's not
but this is an informed doctor. See, I agree with him.
Yeah, the point is just because doctors, doctors have lobbyists and advocacy groups and stuff like that too, and just because the American Medical Association changes their mind on something doesn't mean it automatically becomes fact, So
you're saying that doctors can be corrupt just like big government?
Not just corrupt, but they can be manipulated, so...
Yes, I understand your point. It's a little bit conspiracyist, but I can completely understand it. I mean, that's why the opioid epidemic got so bad. It's one of the reasons why the opioid epidemic got so bad, because doctors were given bonuses for selling opiates, and so that's part of the reason why it got so bad. The same thing could be for transgenders. Maybe doctors are being paid by super liberal groups
No,
saying, "Hey,
I'm
you
not
should
saying
encourage
that's
that."
no. And that's not what I'm saying is happening. I'm saying they're being affected, just like everybody else is. They're being fed this.
Oh, by the media.
This leftist, ideology, and yes, by the media, and they're deciding, enough people. So.
I would hope that a doctor is smart enough that if they went to school and got all their degrees and stuff, that they would be smart enough to trust their degrees over the media.
Yeah, well, some of them are, and they get discredited, and in some cases they can lose their license for not accepting gender dysphoria as something that needs to be corrected with sexual reassignment surgery.
And that is a problem with the government, is that licenses are the government taking your rights away from you and selling them back, and they can take them back again anytime they want.
All right, let's
More
move
problems
on.
with the government. This guy continues his comment saying, I know this from a friend of mine. The standard operating procedure is to seek any other intervention besides SRS, which is, what is that?
Sexual reassignment surgery.
Sex reassignment surgery, thank you. First, since surgery is risky and any other treatment proves effective, they go with that. Despite what you may think, the road to SRS does not begin and end with "I feel like it." So he's saying here that the standard operating procedure with doctors is, let's look at surgery last. Let's see if there's something else that can make this transgender person happy without cutting off their dick and balls. Right?
Yeah, because in some cases, like I said, some people switched back, but there have been other cases where they're like, okay, I've switched, but now I need to also do this surgery. And it's become more of just a how they perceive their self issue,
Yeah.
Like there was one person who transferred into opposite gender and then started getting all sort of body mutilations and just could not make themselves happy,
Yeah. There's those people who look like cats and shit like that. Let me see. Guns_beer_beaches. I like this guy's name. He says, there is a high degree of mental illness for the transgender group. We don't want those with mental illness having guns now. What makes you think we'd want them in control over weapons of war? That's an interesting point that kind of goes into a gun debate, is the left is really scared of mentally ill people having guns, but the right claims that transgender people are mentally ill, so there's kind of a strong disconnect there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, having guns in society and having guns in war are two different things would be my thought there.
Absolutely. Sam_fear said, I think you're right about the amount of mental issues in the group, but it needs to be dealt with on an individual basis just as anyone else.
Absolutely.
Which is something I think we can say for anyone. I don't think it's right to spread a broad blanket over any group of people. Regardless, it all needs to be handled on an individual basis. All right. Going to the next comment here. Political Writing wrote something. He wrote a very long comment. There's just a couple things I wanted to bring up. He talked about how transgender people are not battle ready. Battle ready is a term that he used multiple times, and just talking about how people in the military should be battle ready. They should be at their peak performance, and that's something I want to talk about. It's an interesting idea. And it kind of supports my thought that, transgender people taking hormones need to have a doctor able to help them, able to monitor them. And I would define that as not battle ready. So that it changes my mind a little bit of like, should transgender people be in the military because they're not battle ready. And it just goes along with the hormones. If they choose not to get on the hormones, there's no problem with them being in the military. But if they want to be on hormones, if they want to get a surgery, they're not, at their peak performance.
I would agree, and it all goes back to the standard, exclusions from the military. And are we banning transgender, or are we, by trying to undo the transgender ban, are we giving them extra rights that don't apply?
Yeah.
Are we giving special treatment, I guess?
He also brings up tobacco. His point on tobacco isn't 100% clear to me, but it is interesting. It's why are soldiers not allowed to be transgender, but they're allowed to smoke cigarettes? Because smoking cigarettes could arguably, I mean, factually, it makes you weaker than what you are. Smoking cigarettes is really, really bad for you, and it can affect your physical performance and stuff like that. How come soldiers are allowed to smoke tobacco and do many other drugs? The military is notorious for being a drug haven, but they're not allowed to
He's
be
trying to
transgender.
say, like, oh, let's push transgenders in to make it the next tobacco. That's a little conspiracy theory. But I think it's because tobacco in the military goes back to before we knew it was dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, watch any movie from the 50s or 60s.
We don't know that being transgender is 100% dangerous because we don't have the studies to really back it up either.
But we're starting from a point of it's not the norm. As to where with cigarettes, we start from the point of it is the norm.
I just, if you're gonna ban transgenders because they're not bad already, you should also ban cigarettes and all drugs on soldiers.
Again, it's, one started as the norm and the other.
But it doesn't mean it's right. We know that smoking cigarettes is terrible for you. I don't know why that's still allowed.
Or you asked why it's like that, and that's why it's like that.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about that? Do you think we should ban soldiers from smoking, or do you think we should just allow transgenders in with their needing to see a doctor and stuff like that?
Tobacco slowly kills you, and I think if it starts affecting their performance, definitely. But I think, like, the horrors of war, I would never, they get very few pleasures.
Yeah.
And if tobacco's one of them or drinking's one of them, until it affects their performance, I would say, there's functional smokers, there's functional drinkers. I don't think it's really comparable to the transgender issue.
See, I disagree. I think that smoking even just a short time, even if you've only started smoking within a couple months, that it can severely impede on your ability to run a mile, because your smoker lungs can't handle it.
Again, but it's on an individual basis, which somebody else brought up. Some people who are smokers can
Well,
run
I feel like
that
it's
mile.
easier. I think it's unfair to ban one and not the other. I think it's either ban all or allow all.
Well,
Because if we think that people are responsible with their drug of choice, then we should also allow people to be responsible with being transgender. But if we feel that the military is, no, we only accept peak soldiers, we only want Captain America times a million, then no drugs, no transgender. If you need medicine, you're out. If you need drugs, you're out. Strict.
I guess, yeah.
Let's see. Lolitix says trans women competing in sports is a hot topic for Republicans because they're considered too overpowered. So which is it? Are trans people too weak or too powerful? That's a really good clap back to the Republicans.
Oh, and you want me to answer it?
Well, because I think you and I both agree that transgender people should not be in sports, right? Like they can be in sports, but they should be in their assigned sex sports.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me preface it with this. I don't care enough about professional sports to care at all about that.
Or they should have like their own transgender league.
Well, sure, whatever. I don't care.
Right.
If we're talking about what's fair, then obviously, it should be whatever their birth sex was.
Mm-hmm.
But this person is trying to connect two issues that aren't the same.
A political issue and a private sports issue.
Well, yeah, and the Republicans are worried that they're going to overpower. We're talking about physical there, and the other is more of a mental thing. Because we allow both men and women in the military now, I don't think anybody's saying transgenders are less physically able to serve.
Yeah.
So you're comparing the physical and the mental. You're comparing the free time to the wartime. The comparison's just not the same.
Okay. I see what you're saying. This
you know.
person used their words to make me think one way, whereas you opened my mind.
That's what I do.
Thank you, man. All right.
I think.
Fuck, man. We are low on time.
Well, these other people are trash. So.
All these comments are garbage. Let me see here. So I'm gonna just quickly go over these ones. They talk about how benefits are the reason why people join the military, in that they're scared that transgender people are joining the military just for the sole factor of getting reassignment surgery.
I've never once heard that.
I've heard that before.
Really?
Yeah, but then there's people who also say, well, half the reason people join the military is for housing and education and medical purposes as well. So, like I said, my solution to this is just don't provide any benefits at all. Just pay the soldiers more, and then they can do this. They can decide what to do with their own money. The only medical expenses that the military should cover are the injuries and damages sustained while they were in the military.
Yeah, well, that's stupid. Let me tell you how it should really be. There's a difference. Here's the difference: is people are going to say education is necessary, education is important. You changing your gender isn't. No, that's not what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying the argument's going to be. So, because a lot of people brought that up about, oh, well, just joining for the benefits, and I haven't heard of people changing just to get a sex change, but I suppose, they are pretty expensive. I guess it's possible. But I don't, again, it's just like the sports thing. You're comparing two things that are very different and don't fit into categories even close to each other. So,
well, one could argue that covering someone's college is more expensive than covering their sex reassignment surgery.
Well, yeah, and it probably is, but we're also talking about necessity and
but college is
what is it
necessity.
Okay, but also what is it doing for the individual? What is it doing for their future? So if somebody subscribes to the notion that being transgender having the surgery is bad for you or wrong, but also that college makes you a more well-rounded person ready for the world, then I get where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not saying that's necessarily my belief, but there's two sides to it, and you compare two things that don't really go together that well, and if you can make anything fit, so
yeah. B Tribble and Gray Fox 92404 were the ones who were discussing benefits, and then Funky Money has brought up a good point, is that the armed forces are repeatedly failing to hit their recruitment numbers, and on that fact alone, I think that we should allow transgenders in.
But don't we have people in the reserves, or?
Reserves is a different branch altogether. People choose to be in reserves. They're not sent to the reserves. I mean, they can be once they retire from the military. They can still be in the reserves, but people can just join the reserves outright and then be Army reserve. They don't have to join the military.
Okay, and if we're going to start allowing transgenders, we have to allow everybody else that comes with all the baggage that transgenders come with.
Well, there's some, obviously people who are amputated probably can't be on the field because they're not amputated. Cerebral palsy. Let's go with cerebral palsy. Someone with cerebral palsy, that's a hard one for me to say. Probably, we're at 112. Probably can't be in the military, but someone with transgender or just depression probably could be allowed, because we need more armed forces. As the military is right now, if we made the military smaller, as I want to do, we wouldn't need all those people. Also, something about the benefits is that the government doesn't cover vets very well. So veterans, half the homeless people are veterans that the government hasn't taken care of properly. So there is an argument to say that the government really doesn't offer that great of benefits to people who are in the military. Let me see here. Are any of these comments here interesting that you want to talk about?
Funky Monies. FUNKYMUNNIEZ.
Yeah.
It's not up to us to decide what is and is not elective, nor is it really our business to tell other people what they can and cannot get for medical procedures. You are either going to offer a healthcare plan or you're not, and if it's deemed medically appropriate by a doctor for an individual to have a specific surgery, it's none of our business. So as taxpayer, I kind of feel like kind of is my business, but again, I understand the military making its own decision and me just having to give them some of my money because they're protecting me. I get that.
I can, if my tax dollars are being used for something, I feel like I should know all the details of what they're being used for. But as a libertarian, I also think that everything, the tax dollar should be way differently handled. Taxation is theft.
And then they say if it's appropriate by a doctor, again, these people are treating doctors like they're gods, and one thing is I've seen videos before of Christians who were told they had 3 months to live, and then the Christians respond, those doctors didn't know anything, like they didn't have the power of God, they're dumb. To me, this is the opposite of that. This is making the doctors the gods and saying, well, the doctors decided you get a fancy new vagina. So both arguments are equally just stupid. So
yeah.
But the none of our business argument isn't really that great. But I mean, I think that kind of covers the comments. It seems like a lot of what we came up with is, people are more concerned just with, I think, costs and effectiveness than really with discriminating against one group is what I'm getting from this. Now, I'm sure transgender people would disagree, and of course it probably feels like discrimination, and we don't have all the facts, and it'll take us time to tell, but
we're not trying to find an answer here. We're just trying to have an honest discussion.
That's right.
Any final thoughts?
No. I think we've discussed the comments, and we had a good first episode about it. Our comment episode was longer than our regular episodes.
There was. I think we can relax about that.
We had 23 pages
that we went over.
23 pages of comments. So
my final thought is that these comments did change my mind a little bit. I like the idea of what is battle ready, because previously I was like, fuck yeah, just let the transgender people in. But then the idea of the military generals deciding on who should be in the military and the definition of are you battle ready kind of makes me hesitate for a little bit to just allow in all transgenders. So the comments honestly did change my mind a little bit. I don't know if I have an honest solution. I don't know what is the right solution, but it's a lot to be thought about, a lot to be discussed, and we'll see how things go forward. We'll see if this is what causes Trump to not win in 2020.
I don't know if that'll be the defining issue, but we'll see.
As long as they get Pete Buttigieg or who's the Texan guy who went up against
Beto O'Rourke.
Beto O'Rourke. Those guys are the moderate Democrats, and
those all sound like awful people.
They're way more moderate than the other options. So let's hope they choose one of those two dudes instead of those who shall not be named.
We'll see.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Apologies, Matt, for going over the time limit.
No, that's okay. I'll allow it this one time because we haven't recorded in a while.
All right, cool. You guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Send us an email at quadrant4politics@gmail.com. That's the number 4, not spelled out. And we'll see you at the next one.